Hello, my friends. It is day 256, and we just read Daniel chapter 4 through Daniel chapter 6. And before we get into our recap today, I want to thank you for taking a moment to check out this video. Hopefully, you're finding the yearly Bible reading program helpful, enjoyable, and a tremendous blessing to you as we make our way through the entire Bible this year. If you have not yet accepted the invitation, please take a moment to check out the description box below, and there you will find a link that will take you directly to the YouVersion Bible app, where you can join a number of people reading the Bible every single day and leaving feedback on the things they're learning. So we'd love for you to be a part of the group, and we hope you will find it enjoyable. All right, so listen, we're in the book of Daniel. And Daniel is a pretty incredible book. As you all know, it's one of my favorite books because to me, it is the bridge that gets us from the Old Testament to the New Testament. Literally, if you read the book of Daniel, even if you may not have been, or if you're not as well versed in all the other prophets, if you read the book of Daniel and understand what it's doing and what it's saying, you will be very well equipped to understand what's happening in the New Testament and how it relates to the Old Testament. I feel that without the book of Daniel, it is, maybe should I say, without a contextual understanding of the book of Daniel, you will probably struggle to understand what's happening in the New Testament as it relates to the Old Testament. So it's just that powerful. And so today we had a number of things happening. And to be honest with you, what we find in the book of Daniel is basically the contest between the pagan nations, gods, if you will, and really the God of Israel. And it doesn't really, kind of pan out that way. What it really talks through, the way, if you look at the way it's being depicted, it's not like God versus God, but really is God's people versus those who are not God's people. And it's trying to do what has always been the main contest throughout the Bible. It is proving who is God's people by proving whose God is real or not. That's essentially what's happening. And this takes a unique form because in this text, you see a king whom God has put in place to do something for the sake of his will, stepping out of bounds of what God has put him there to do. And God has to reel him in by his own sovereignty and his own power. He has to reel him in so that he can understand that he's not there to simply do whatever it is he has in mind that he wants to do, but rather he must pay respect to the fact that God has placed him there for a reason, and he must comply with that. So in chapter 4, that's what you get. You get God coming to Nebuchadnezzar and confirming to him, or rather, should I say, demonstrating to him that he's not in charge as he would assume. In fact, in chapter 4, verse 2, he says, I want you all to know about the miraculous signs and wonders the Most High God has performed for me. How great are his signs, how powerful his wonders. His kingdom will last forever, his rule through all generations. And so he takes us down this journey where he got beside himself and where he began to think that he was the stuff and he was the big, king ruling, and God knocked him down to size, putting him literally in a field, and showing him that there is only one God, there's only one ruler, there's really only one king, and he is only an instrument in God's grand story. It's interesting here because it shows how God has the ability and the power to humble us. And oftentimes, man, this is just the unfortunate thing. Humility by the hand of God often comes through humiliation. And, so there's two ways to be humble. You can just elect to be humble yourself, or you can allow God to do it. But just understand, if God gets involved, he's often going to use humiliation. And we have seen that here in this text. In the 5th chapter, the same concept, the same idea, motif is there. This time it is King Belshazzar. And King Belshazzar has not learned the lesson from Nebuchadnezzar. He has not read history. And so he now is full of pride, and God begins to write on the wall. And the message that he gives him is that your days are numbered. Your days are numbered as a king, that you have been weighed in the balances and you're not measuring up, and that your kingdom has been divided between the Medes and Persians. Now, this is very important because this consequence is what gets us from Babylon to Persia. So you can see what's going on here. This is why this book is so important. We started with Babylon. We are now seeing ourselves move towards the direction of Persia, and we see why now. It is literally because Belshazzar has not respected the rule of God, and now God is judging him for his actions. So what does God do in these situations? He takes the king who is rebellious and he hands him over to another king who ultimately becomes rebellious, and then he hands him over to another king, and the cycle continues on and on and on. This is exactly what's happening here. And so in order to understand the times and the empires as they will lead us to the coming of Jesus, you want to understand the backstory and the trials that God's people have to go through while these transitions are happening. So Babylon, God humbles, just like he said he would. Remember, the prophet said he was going to do this. Ezekiel, Jeremiah, they all talked about this. And here we see this is actually happening. Now, Medes Persia is going to come, and Persia will be the king that will give Israel the opportunity to go back to their land and rebuild. Okay. But before we get to Cyrus and Persia and all these other ones, we have Darius the Mede, and he obviously is not aware of what's happening and what God is doing. So he takes Daniel, who refuses to comply with the ordinance of the land. He opens up his window, he prays, and people report him. And of course, he gets thrown in the lion's den, and God comes to his rescue. Now, the thing that's so powerful about this is, as we're reading about Daniel, if you look at the end of chapter 6, it says Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus. So you see all throughout the Persian rule of his lifetime, he was successful, and he was able to thrive. But here's what we want to understand. Daniel has been in exile since the third year of King Jehoiakim's reign in Judah. Okay, he's been there. By the time we get to the end of chapter 6, Daniel is now prospering, or it's being spoken of as prospering during the reign of Darius and Cyrus. It goes to show you the length and the breadth of his ministry and of his life as it pertains to this entire experience of bondage and captivity and enslavement. You know, this is just an amazing amount of time that he has spent in all of these things, and his service will not be few. It will be very broad, and it's going to speak. We're going to see that it bounces back and forth. Chapter 7, we'll go back to Belshazzar's time, and you'll see it's bouncing kind of around. But the point is, you're now becoming acquainted with these kingdoms and these kings and how they are hostile against God's will and his plan. And God interjects and God imposes upon the plans of these kings, letting them know that you didn't get here by yourself. You got here because I made the opportunity available for you, and I can take that away from you. So don't get caught up in your own self and your own ambition, because remember, you're only here for a purpose. And once that purpose is done, then you're done. So don't try to go any further than that. But obviously, like any human being would do, they do exactly what they're not supposed to do, and God has to judge them for it. So powerful readings. This is giving us all sorts of insight. We want to pay attention to these nations. Marking your Bibles: Babylon, Medes, Persia. We're going to get into some Greek or Greek nations. We're going to talk about that. We'll see that as it comes up. But this is the blueprint you need to understand how do we get from the end of the Old Testament in the book of Malachi to the beginning of the New Testament with the book of Matthew, or more literally Mark, as it was the first one written. And that bridge helps you understand why Jesus does what he does, why he says what he says, where he's getting what he says from, and how this all ties into the narrative that started with the book of Genesis and ultimately ends with the revelation of Jesus Christ. So, friends, this is exciting, man. Listen, I hope you're enjoying it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You should leave some comments in the comment box below, and I think it will help us all kind of fellowship around these thoughts. But until next time, thank you for watching. Take care. God bless. And remember, live by the word.